Bom dia. Sejam todos muito bem-vindos a mais um painel da Expert ESG 2021. Antes de mais nada, gostaria de parabenizar todas as mulheres pelo dia de ontem, dia marcante, dia especial, em homenagem a elas que são responsáveis por tudo. Acho que não dá para descrever melhor. Gostaria de agradecer a todos e todas que estão nos acompanhando nesse bate-papo. Lembrando que esse é o primeiro ano da Expert ESG, uma versão 100% online, 100% gratuita, focado nessa temática que está cada vez mais em alta. E para ajudar, eu trouxe alguns números aqui para exemplificar o quanto essa temática está em alta. Os fundos ESG captaram mais de 2,5 bilhões em 2020 e em 2020 foram criados 85 novos produtos rotulados como sustentáveis, enquanto no ano anterior, em 2019, tinham apenas 6 produtos aqui no Brasil. A XP fechou 2020 com 15 diferentes fundos ESG na plataforma, com opções de fundos a partir de R$ 100, e eles já somam mais de 20 mil investidores, sejam fundos locais ou internacionais. E para aprofundarmos um pouco essa discussão, eu tenho a honra de contar aqui comigo com Navindo Catugampola, Head de Investimentos Sustentáveis do Morgan Stanley Investment Management, e Túlio Machado, Head de Infraestrutura e sócio do Grupo XP. I'm going to switch to English now, and my first question is for you, Navindo. So thank you very much for being with us today. And Morgan Stanley has already incorporated the ESG team in your investment process for many years. We know that. Can you tell us a little about when did you start this? Why did you decide to join the ESG community? And what were the main points of attention did you have of the beginning of implementation of this process in Morgan Stanley?
Thank you, Leon, and good morning to everyone. They're very good questions. So in terms of our history when it comes to incorporating sustainability for Morgan Stanley Investment Management, this goes back in a formal way to 2013 when we first signed the United Nations Principles for Responsible Investments, the UNPRI. But even before that, sustainability was always a consideration on our side. And for me personally, I have almost 10 years of experience in this field, originally advising companies as part of the investment banking division around sustainability strategy and sustainability issuance, but now on the investment side. In terms of why we do this, there's two main reasons. The first thing is it's our responsibility as an asset manager. So we aren't managing our own money. We're managing money on behalf of our clients, many of whom I think are on this Zoom today. So it's our responsibility as a manager of capital on behalf of our clients to do so in a responsible way. And that's part of the reason that we approach sustainability, to make sure we're investing our clients' money in a responsible way. But there's another and even more important aspect to this, and that is we are exclusively an active fund manager at MSIM. And as an active fund manager, we are looking to maximize risk-adjusted returns for our clients and take a very research-driven approach to our investments. And sustainability is one aspect of that helps us make better investment decisions. So looking at sustainability considerations helps us to identify, isolate, and hopefully mitigate risks, but it also allows us to identify and hopefully capitalize on opportunities related to sustainability, and therefore capture alpha and generate returns for our clients. So those are the two main reasons that we started on this process, and in terms of how we are implementing it on our side.
Perfect, thank you. And Tulio, the next for you. You lead the management team linked to infrastructure and XP assets. And I might imagine that this must be recurrent theme when you're thinking about which project are you going to enter or not. So how has the asset manager, the XP asset manager, and your team adapted to incorporate the ESG process in the analysis of new investments? And was it a sudden change in the way you do until now, or have you thinking about this process for a long time?
Okay, so thank you, Leon, Navindo. It's my pleasure to be here today. Well, I think it's a funny story because the starting point was an awkward situation back in 2019. It is a story when one coworker and we went to Washington, D.C. to fundraise with a development institution. We received a request for a proposal from this multilateral finance institution to manage a credit fund focused in Brazil. And one of the topics was to explain what we had in ESG practices and what we considered of ESG in our investment process. But we didn't have any practice in place. So at that point, we started saying that all of our investments had a due diligence process with regards to environment, but actually we were only compliant with the Brazilian environmental rules. And at the end of the presentation, that was a disaster. We did not know how to answer basic questions. And it is needless to say that we did not become managers of the fund. But at that point, we realized how far we were and that we needed to learn and to understand what was going on. So we started hiring a consultants company to help us. Basically, our infrastructure division started from scratch. So, I mean, until today, we are having twice a month training session to learn and to incorporate the ESG best practices. So in our day-to-day, for example, for example, today in our investment process, we have a due diligence questionnaire that assess basically subjects with regards to ESG topics. And it has been helping us to incorporate ESG in our investment process. So that was basically the beginning for us. And that what we are doing today and trying to incorporate those ESG practices in our investment process.
Great. And Navindo, when we talk about investments, for you, are there any of these acronyms E, S, or G that prove to be most important, or are they all fundamental? And we know that ESG means different things for different investors. Anyone can think about different ways about ESG. Can you please elaborate on difference between restriction screening, ESG integration, impact investing, thematic investments? There's a lot of things that we talk of this, just for our audience to understand a little bit more about this theme.
Absolutely. So to start to think about the three different pillars: environmental, social, and governance. And again, let's take it back to how it helps us to isolate investment opportunities that help us generate returns. So the way we think about the E, S, and the G varies sector by sector, and it's very much a materiality-focused approach. Now, what do I mean by this? Essentially, when we're thinking about different sectors and different opportunities, the relative importance of the environmental, social, and governance factors varies. And let me give you some examples. If we're looking at the financial sector from an environmental perspective, from a carbon footprint perspective, it doesn't really have a huge impact. But from a governance perspective, hugely important to think about how banks are run, whether they have strong policies in place, whether they have good training programs, whether they have robust oversight procedures. All of these governance elements are critical. And unfortunately, you look at some of the banking scandals that have happened recently, and that really makes you realize just how important governance is for the banking sector. Meanwhile, if I think about another sector, and here we'll use the example of energy and utilities. Clearly, with energy and utilities, the environmental pillar becomes critical for us to consider. How are these companies evolving their business model to take into account the increasing focus on climate change? So the environmental pillar might be more important for us when we think about the energy and utilities sectors. And then let me finish on social. When we're thinking about social factors, again, the sort of sectors we'll think about there: consumer products, retailers, social factors become quite important there for two reasons. Social factors are important in terms of how those companies are managing supply chains. And again, particularly over the last 12 months or so that we've all lived through, making sure you have safe, secure, efficient supply chains and you're treating the suppliers fairly has been critically important, but also customers as well for those consumer products or retailers. So the relative importance of E, S, and G varies for us, and we apply it based on a materiality framework to make sure we're really isolating what is most important for any given sector and for any given issuer. And then, Leon, you touched upon an interesting point, because there's so many different terminology or acronyms that are used in this space. So just to break it down and make things very simple, going back to my first answer in terms of how we think about sustainability, we think about it as a spectrum between managing sustainability related risks through to capturing sustainability related opportunities. And when people talk about restriction screening, they're talking about excluding negative sectors or companies that aren't performing well to try to reduce risk. When people talk about thematic investments or impact investments, they're talking about key themes that are important in the sustainability marketplace, themes like climate change or diversity and inclusion, and how the investments you're making are supporting those themes. Impact investments are isolating and finding companies whose business models, whose products and services are really helping to drive positive change. So a renewable energy company might be a good example of an impact-focused company. So what I would really suggest to the audience here is, rather than getting too attached to these different terminologies, think about it as a spectrum of risk management through to identifying opportunities. And for us, ESG integration is combining all of this together in our investment approach.
Perfect answer. And Tulio, you have lived with sustainability questions, whether in energy, sanitation, projects with less environmental impacts for some time, I believe. So how has this influenced your portfolio, and how has XP Asset Management practically incorporated these points?
Well, XP Asset just recently joined at PRI as well, the Principles for Responsible Investment from the United Nations, as Navindo mentioned. I think that's also important and a starting point to our asset management division. And I think within the infrastructure space, we are currently managing a couple of renewable projects, for example, especially solar projects, and a very remarkable biomass thermal plant in the north of the country called Oxy Energy. I mean, so in terms of portfolio companies, we do not have exposure to coal or thermal plants, which is good. And but the investment in Oxy is a company we are building in the state of Roraima. It's very remarkable for us because we will bring clean energy and cheaper energy to an isolated state. Because, for example, Boa Vista is the last state capital off grid. It's not only not connected to the grid, to the integrated system, but also until last year, for example, depended of Venezuela to supply energy to the state. So, I mean, several aspects make this project special for us. Local communities, native population, that we need to have all of the attention. So it's been a great learning process for us, great experience to learn on the job, especially building a huge project with all the challenges that we faced last year, for example, related to the COVID-19. So definitely we are committed with renewable projects, sanitation investments, for example, as you asked, Leon, and that all of those projects are environmental friendly, and we will pursue not only the environmental, the ESG, as Navindo just mentioned right now, as well, and all the investments we are looking for. I think it's an important aspect for us to be committed with the ESG investments. And I think utility space, the renewable energy market, it's something that we are focused on.
Great. And Navindo, Morgan Stanley, it's one of the largest managers that we have in our platform, one of the best ones that we have. And I believe you have relationship with a lot of companies. And so what the relationship do you as group have with the main CEOs of the market, of the companies that you invest, and how do you influence or can maybe push them or these companies to work on these issues that we talk a little bit about and that you maybe see need of improvement in aspects or ESG? And in other words, can you tell us a little bit about engagement and why do you do it? And what is the benefit for your clients invested in your products like global brands, for example?
Yeah, absolutely. Maybe before I answer that, I actually wanted to comment on something that Tulio said. I really like the way that Tulio phrased this, because it's really important to remember that E, S, and G are very much interconnected. And the example that Tulio gave of essentially where, investing in energy it's not only, clean energy, renewable energy is not just good from a environmental or climate perspective, but it also has significant social benefits to local communities, particularly those that are underserved at the moment. I think is a critically important point, that all of this is interconnected, the E, S, and the G, and to invest in multiple aspects at the same time can be critically important. And then to address your question, Leon, about engagement, and again, I'm going to give you some concrete examples here. So engagement for us, really, there's three main reasons to do it. And again, I go back to the point that we are an active fund manager. As an active fund manager, our clients and the people that invest in our funds expect us to work for them and to work hard for them. And so there's three aspects to the engagement side that really support that effort. The first is we engage to make sure we have all of the information that's necessary to come to a highly informed and incisive and a high conviction investment case. So, from we have a research-driven process where when we're making investments, we'll thoroughly analyze the data that's publicly available. But if there are questions we have, including on the sustainability side, that's when we go to the engagement front. And because of the size that we have as MSIM, we usually get pretty decent access, even at the C-suite, to actually put these questions and make sure we have all of the information to make highly informed investment decisions. So that's the first thing. The second thing is, again, going back to my point that we manage money on behalf of our clients. So we have a duty to them. We have a duty to many of them that have trusted us with their money, to push companies to do better, to push companies for better sustainability outcomes, to do a better job for their customers, for their investors, for their communities, and to improve their own standards to be performing better from a sustainability perspective. That's our responsibility as a steward of capital, to push companies to do better. But then the third and the most important element is essentially, if we can do that, if we can successfully push companies to improve, to do better, that shouldn't just be about a moral perspective or just trying to do. I mean, doing the right thing is important, but it also, we feel, has an effect on the bottom line, because if companies are improving, it should be reflected in their fundamentals, in their business success, and ultimately allow us to generate better returns for clients. So let me give you a couple of simple examples. You mentioned, some of the some funds we have like global brands. Well, in the context of a consumer retail company that we engage with, Plastic waste is an important challenge and an important issue at the moment. And we, at Morgan Stanley, we had 2 years ago, we launched a plastic waste resolution. This is at the bank level, at the institutional level, to try to help clients, clients we work with in investment banking, companies we talk to within investment management, to address the challenge of their waste footprint and the plastic waste created. And in the case of this particular retail company, that it's I guess you might call it food and beverage retail, and there's a significant amount of plastic waste that was generated as a result of their operations. So talking to them about that and saying, look, this is something that in the medium term, your customers are going to be concerned about, and they're going to be, it's become such a topical issue now, they're going to be voting with their dollars about where they want to spend their dollars and where they want to be spending it in your stores. So thinking about your focus and your commitment when it comes to reducing plastic waste and reducing plastic packaging and improving the environmental footprint of your company can be critically important for you to try and keep hold of customers, grow your customer base, and ultimately generate more profits for you as the company and better returns for us as the investor. And they took that feedback on board, and actually they rolled out, some quite significant policies on that front. And unfortunately, I can't, for compliance reasons, I can't give you the name of the company, but it's a company we invest in, and we've seen that benefit, right? We've seen the benefit in the brand value, in the market share, in the performance of the company, and that's something we were able to capture and reflect as returns for clients. So that's the third really important aspect of this, that sustainability for us and engagement. If we can persuade companies to embark on an improving trajectory, that can only be to the company's benefit and ultimately, benefit us as the investors and our clients as the that are investing in our funds.
Perfect, because you say a lot of things that reflect what XP truly believes when you choose our investment or product that we show to our clients. So great. And Tulio, your investment, you invest usually for long-term investments. When you talk about infrastructure, there are maybe 20 years, 15 years, a lot of things. So it's important not just to look what is happening now, but also look to the future. And in your opinion, what are the main points of discussions related to governance for the next 10 years? And I choose this specific topic of governance just to clarify to our audience as well.
Okay, well, I think in infrastructure, especially in Brazil, in the Brazilian market, we recently suffered several scandals with regards to compliance issues. So, for example, the car wash operation, the car wash scandal in Brazil was mainly linked to oil and gas and infrastructure projects. I think now more than 5 years since the beginning of this corruption scandal, I really assume that we are better prepared to face compliance and governance as a whole, as a country, as investors, companies that are located here in Brazil. And as an asset management firm, we manage third-party capital, and we have that just Navindo just said, for example, the fiduciary duty. So transparency is already part of our practice. And so for the next 10 years, Leon, getting back to your question, I guess transparency will be the main thing. I think, if you are investors, if stakeholders and community, they trust in your governance principles, this is the key point for the next years. I think this is very important, especially once again in Brazil, due to what we've been passing through those recent years with regards to governance. This is very important for us, and I think transparency is the main topic, for example, for asset managers to be, really focused and to direct, give the message to our investors. And clearly, this is one of the topics that I think for the next year's governance will be related to.
And Navindo, any point to complement this question?
Yeah, I think Tulio's makes an excellent point here in terms of governance being, you know, the cornerstone for good sustainability practice, because it all stems from good governance, good practices, you know, setting the example from the top. There's an interesting aspect to this, and particularly when we think from a time frame perspective, we almost see governance as being the bridge that encompasses, but it's you know, regardless of the time frame you're looking at, it's important in the near term, medium term, and long term to have strong, robust, and transparent policies around governance. There's one maybe other aspect that I would highlight, which is when we're thinking about medium term and longer term aspects. Again, I gave the example earlier of how different sectors might have different you know, weights towards environmental, social, and governance, depending on the sector the company's involved in. But there's also a time element to this as well. And one of these things that we think about is, and let's think about social factors. If you invest in, you know, education or training and development of your employees, or you know, good relations with the trade unions, you may not see the results in year 1 or year 2. But in the medium term, over a 5-year, 10-year horizon, if you have a more committed, better trained, more motivated workforce, it allows you a remarkable amount of flexibility, and ultimately, you know, allows the company to be more productive. So we look at things like that when we're particularly thinking about, you know, a longer term time horizon, how things like those social factors might start to influence the profitability and competitiveness of a company. And then on the environmental side, ultimately, it's about resiliency. So what is again, Tulio gave some examples on the infrastructure side, building in that resiliency into the system for long-term projects with you know, that essentially are future-proofed against changing environments and changing scenarios around, be it carbon pricing or the physical environment that we live in. Threats from flood or drought or natural disaster start to become very important. So that maybe gives you some idea of how we think about investment from a time perspective as well, and the relative importance of E, S, and G factors there.
Great. So now, guys, I'm gonna make this question for both, and maybe Tulio can start answering. Many people are skeptical about the ESG team in investments because they claim that in some way can harm the product's return. Lavindo says a lot of things about commitment and productive about the companies. So how do you see this maybe issue or problem or point that these people have about our products, our ESG products and process?
Well, I think since last week, Leon, we are doing this event and talking about ESG and investment perspectives. So this week, of course, we're going to have more discussions and panels. So, but I think, I mean, XP has this commitment, and we have, for example, our ESG director, Martha. She recently published an article discussing how ESG became a chapter in the investment process. Every asset manager needs to dominate and to consider ESG as a whole. And starting, as Navindo just pointed out, from our own workplace, your own workplace. I mean, this is not only about returns anymore. If it's you impact, your returns will be lower, equal, or greater returns. I mean, but also through what they call the stakeholder capitalism. So if you don't take it very seriously, you'll be out of the game. So I think it's not only what we passed through last year, but this new generation, millennials. I mean, they want shortlist places to work if you don't are committed with ESG and with global problems. I mean, your partners won't choose you as an investor. I mean, clients won't buy your product. So I mean, there are several topics with related to that that it's not only related to returns anymore. I mean, it's a matter, I would say, of survival for companies, especially once again after the pandemic, the COVID-19. I think the whole world is more conscious with regards to ESG, and people will require companies to care about that. So once again, this is a topic that in the past people thought about that. I mean, we are gonna do impact investment with low returns, but that's not anymore the topic thing. Everybody needs to take care of it and take it very seriously.
Yeah, and maybe I pick up there because Tulio is exactly right. When we talk to companies, there's been a real shift in their mindset, and maybe 5 years ago, as recently as 5 years ago, if you talk to companies about investing and spending money on diversity and inclusion, or on environmental projects, or ensuring decent work and resilient jobs for their employees, or reducing their waste footprint, if those implied costs for the company, then they may have been a little bit reluctant to do any of those things. But in reality now, particularly in this post-pandemic environment that we're all living through, the whole way in which customers are looking at companies has changed. The lens they look at them has completely changed. So the companies that are going to be performing well, that are positioned to succeed in the recovery period, are those that, to take Tulio's phrase of stakeholder capitalism, it's going to be those companies that are focused on stakeholder capitalism, those ones that have significantly enhanced their brand because they took care of their customers over the last 12 months. They took care of their employees. They made sure that they weren't cutting corners on the environmental side, where just to keep business going, they were, emissions went up and pollution went up. You look at how much customers and employees, in particular, when employees are choosing companies to work for, they're choosing on these sorts of metrics now. If you want to be a successful company in the next 5, 10, 15, 20 years, you have to be showing how you are making progress on the front. So for us, that starts to become very important, to be able to identify and isolate those companies that are making progress, because those are the companies that will be succeeding, and therefore they're the companies that we want to be investing in. To the point around, does sustainable investing compromise returns? Am I giving something up through sustainable investing? As Tulio said, this is very much an outdated concept. There used to be this old idea of what I might call ethical investing. And ethical investing means, I'll invest in this company or in this project because they're trying to do the right thing. Maybe I don't mind giving up a little bit of returns in order to help them accomplish a goal that I think is important. Now, that's a very outdated concept. That idea of, it's almost like something of a hybrid between charity and investment. That's a very old concept. Now, when we think about sustainable investing, we're not thinking about what we might give up to do the right thing. We're thinking about creating a virtuous circle. Essentially, how investing in companies that are doing the right thing and companies that are making progress results in benefits to that company that flow through the bottom line. Remember, ultimately, this boils down to valuation, fundamentals of valuation, flows down to the bottom line, and therefore has an enhancing effect on our returns. A very simple example. So climate change and carbon footprint. If we find companies that are taking the decarbonization agenda very seriously, let's give an example of a sector, the auto sector. So companies are taking decarbonization seriously, that are moving towards electrification of their vehicle fleet, that are reducing the energy consumption in their manufacturing process, that are shifting off using fossil fuels and onto renewable energy. That hits the bottom line. If you use less energy, you spend less money, you reduce costs, you improve the bottom line. if you are moving away from fossil fuels and onto renewable energy, you reduce the volatility of your energy consumption costs and its sensitivity to carbon prices. We stress test portfolios driven, and their EBITDA based on carbon price. We have that, that ability in our portfolio management systems. So if you take yourselves off fossil fuels and onto renewable energy, you're reducing your sensitivity to a volatility in carbon price. That ultimately reduces the volatility of your returns as well. And if you are trying to engage in this transition to a green economy by improving production of, as I say, in the auto sector, electric vehicles, and accelerating on that front and reducing manufacturers, say, more polluting vehicles, again, it puts you in a better position to succeed as economies transition to greener business models. So for us, this is very much about how we assess company fundamentals and valuation, and how we think about future cash flows and their sensitivity to sustainability factors.
Great. So it's not just about reducing risk, it's about adding return to our portfolio as well.
Absolutely.
So guys, could you maybe give us a tip or a message for those who have been with us through this excellent chat, and paying attention when they decide for each product or each fund they have to look at when they thought about the ESG incorporating the investment process in these funds? Could you give some tips for our audience, all the guys and girls that with us through this chat and this morning?
Sure. I think that was very interesting, Leon, just to hear what Navindo explained and said of the trends, outside Brazil. And as he just pointed in the last question, I think it's a matter of cost reduction for companies. And he gave great examples with regards to clean energy, to electric vehicles. And it's also related to technology. So companies that don't face and pursue those topics, they will lose not only in terms of cost, but in terms of technology and advancements. But with regards to your last question, in terms of tips, I'll get back to my first answer. Start and start sooner than later, because it's not too late. It's not a shame if you haven't started yet, and try to incorporate those components by heart. If you truly believe that in it, it will be natural, and it will benefit you and your company in all of the aspects. So there is no downside in it. It's only upsides, truly. And once again, it's mandatory. It's not an option anymore. You need to take care of your company, your employees. In our case here, we are not only taking care inside the asset management division with our team. With gender equality, we are trying to hire more women. I just received an email from our people HR division that they're going to provide for free one intern, and they're going to focus in people with color or women, that just to try to be to have more people. And we have this commitment as a company until 2025. We are targeting to have 50% of our employees women employees, and it's very important. So I think it's not only, once again, to your asset management division, but your portfolio companies. It's not only a fundraising matter. A fundraising strategy. You don't need to be focused on ESG to fundraise with your limited partners, your investors. But this is something that we need to change our mindset. It's important for the world. And if you truly believe, once again, start soon. It will be good for you and for the society.
It's not an option. It's not about if, it's what about when. So Navindo, your final message.
Yeah, thank you, Leon. And I think Tulio's comments were spot on. Maybe if I add to this, the assurance I can give you, and you've probably heard this over the course of the panel, is if you're investing in MSIM's funds, which we have on your platform, you're already benefiting from our approach to sustainability, our philosophy, our policies, our oversight process. I have a global head of sustainability that I report to as well, that really influences the way in which we invest across asset classes. So my first tip is to say to everyone, when you're thinking about where to put your money and which asset managers to trust your investments with, to think about whether you are hearing a convincing, holistic, comprehensive approach to what is their philosophy when it comes to sustainable investing, and how is it being implemented. So that's my first tip. The second tip I would give is to say, think about why is it important to you as an individual or you as an institution, and what issues specifically are most relevant to your organization. And then think about whether those issues and those themes are being addressed by the investments and the funds that you're investing in. So what I mean by this is, you can think about whether it's climate change, whether it's circular economy and waste reduction, whether it's decent work and jobs. Tulio mentioned diversity and inclusion. Those are high-level themes. Those are, by the way, the 4 themes that are important to us at MSIM and influence the way in which we invest, select, and analyze companies and issuers. So if those are themes that are important to you, or to think about whether you feel an asset manager can address those and is approaching those in a way that you feel is aligned with your own philosophy. So that's the second tip. Think about why is it important to you and what exactly is important to you. And the last tip I would give is, you need to see the evidence, right? The proof has to be in black and white. So you should think about, when looking at companies, when looking at asset managers, where is the evidence that they are doing what they say they're doing, be it investing in a sustainable way? What is the analysis and the data and reporting they can produce, both for companies and for asset managers? And you need to be able to see that and have conviction that is helping your investment case as well. So that's the third thing. Look for the evidence and demand the evidence from the investments and the companies that you're investing in.
Thank you. So I want to thank you, Navindo and Tulio, for this class. We are running out of time now, so I'm gonna switch back to Portuguese to conclude this panel. So, pessoal, muito obrigado pela participação. Espero que vocês tenham gostado. Acho que foi uma aula aqui do Navindo, do Tulio, de como os gestores têm abraçado, incorporado toda essa temática dentro dos seus processos de investimento. Cada vez, eu tenho a certeza que a gente vai ver cada vez mais isso sendo falado, sendo discutido. Um tema super importante, tem que estar presente. Tulio citou isso, Navindo citou. Acho que não é mais uma questão não é mais uma opção entre as gestoras, é uma questão de necessidade. Todo mundo vai ter que falar sobre isso, todo mundo vai ter que prestar atenção ao tema. Espero que vocês tenham gostado, acompanhado cada ponto do que foi discutido aqui, e nos seus investimentos procurem sempre prestar atenção nessa temática, porque é uma temática que vai não só, que nem a gente falou, diminuir o risco dos portfólios, mas trazer, de fato, na linha final, muito resultado para as empresas, para os investimentos. Então, obrigado por estarem conosco essa manhã. Acho que foi uma aula que, mais uma vez, eu repito. Thank you very much, Navindo, Tulio.
Thank you.
E espero que vocês aproveitem e estejam gostando da Expert ESG. Tem muitos painéis ainda para virem. Um grande abraço e obrigado pela presença e por nos acompanhar nessa manhã. Tchau, tchau.
Tchau, tchau.
Thank you so much. Bye-bye.